Hi everybody, Dr. Ahles here. In this short video, we're going to talk a little bit more about ATP, adenosine triphosphate, which is your body's energy money. When we talk about ATP, its name tells us its chemical structure. We have this part of it called adenosine, and attached to that adenosine are three phosphate groups, adenosine triphosphate. When we look at adenosine triphosphate, I mentioned we have those three phosphate groups out here at the end. Notice, like we have labeled, the chemical bond that connects those phosphate groups to each other, those chemical bonds have a lot of energy. The closer we get to this adenosine group, the less energy that is stored between the bonds. This is why typically your body is going to be breaking this third bond to get energy, and less often it's going to break this second bond right here. This outside one has the most energy. If I break it, I become adenosine diphosphate with two phosphate groups. When we talk about that energy, like I mentioned, we're always storing it inside chemical bonds. And that's true whether we're talking about ATP or the sugar that you have in carbohydrates. When we break down the bonds that are attaching these phosphate groups to ATP, this releases the energy that's stored inside of them. And the way that we release that energy, or the way that we capture that energy, is by moving around a phosphate group. When phosphate groups move, it's called phosphorylation. Phosphorylation is one way that we attach that third phosphate group to ADP, making it ATP. Phosphorylation is a process that helps us to store energy. So add a phosphate group, create a bond between them, and energy is stored. Compared to the process of breaking down ATP to get its energy, this is that process we saw with proteins as well, hydrolysis. So if I perform hydrolysis, I'm breaking down ATP to release energy. If I'm performing phosphorylation, I'm using energy to build the compound ATP. When we think about what the body can use ATP to do, there are many different functions. I want to highlight first the process of transportation. Some molecules we have a lot of on the outside of the cell, but we still want to pump more out there. We're doing something called active transport. Active means I need energy. ATP helps me to do that transport. We also use ATP to do things like mechanical work. Best example of this is muscle contraction. The process of going from a relaxed position to a sitting up position requires ATP. Or in your stomach, for example, the process of contracting those smooth muscle cells to help push the food through your digestive tract, that's going to require ATP. Notice, by the way, when I use this ATP to perform a process, I end up with ADP. I end up with a form that doesn't have nearly as much energy. But I used that energy either to move something or to contract. We can also use ATP in doing really any kind of chemical reaction. When we do a chemical reaction, we always have this thing called activation energy. Activation energy is kind of like the kickstart that makes things happen. So consider when you're studying how you have this really big push you have to put in at the beginning to make yourself start doing something. Once you do it, you'll keep doing it. That's the way chemical reactions are in the body. So I can break down a molecule of ATP, use it to force these two reactants together to create something larger that wouldn't have worked on its own. So ATP, like we see here, performs chemical work. It helps to build chemicals. We saw in the previous slide, it does contraction work or movement work. That's what it does in muscles. And it also does, as we talked about, transportation work, moving things inside and outside the cell. So ATP, my energy money, the thing I use to do everything that keeps my body and my cells alive.